actually thinking how many episodes of TICtalk I've done. I think this is the 13th, which is actually quite scary because it feels like a lifetime that I've been doing it. But no, it's great to have the call, as I said.
Yeah,
Obviously we've been kind of meaning to do this for the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks. So apologies about the delay, but
no worries.
it's great to have you on here. Did you want to just maybe quickly introduce yourself and the company and
Sure.
kind of just for anyone that's unaware?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So my name is Wolfgang Berger. I'm Austrian, right? Started in Germany 22 years ago as the first employee of DFGE. After I started mechanical engineering in Munich. So yeah, it was an interesting phase also for the company, right? Because we like thought from the beginning whether we do the things properly or we don't do it at all, right? We follow methodology, right? Right? It should be certifiable and so on and so far, right? And we were, over more than a decade, we were alone, right? So
Sure.
all the greenwashing, all the crazy things which were happening back in the day. So we always stick to the plan there. And yeah, currently I'm running the business development department of DFG, and we serve pretty much any ESG or CSR or sustainability topic imaginable. First and foremost for B2B companies who, have, let's say, different needs, different schemes, right, in place where they have to fulfill requirements by law, like the
Sure.
CERTANIA in Europe, have to fulfill requirements or risk assessments by the capital markets, and still the largest and most important part, I would say, from a B2B, from a customer perspective, right? In order
Sure.
to do business with certain companies, you have to fulfill certain requirements, you have to do certain assessments, and so on and so forth, right?
Sure. Sure. Yeah, fantastic. But it's really interesting that you mentioned that because I think when it comes to kind of regulatory elements within the market, the first kind of point of call that I was actually going to discuss with you is this kind of shift in
Yeah,
TIC or ESG specifically within TIC when it comes to being from compliance led to more about value creation and risk mitigation.
yeah,
I think that kind of back in the day, it was probably more of a tick boxing exercise, more of kind of a reactive strategy, whereas now it's about, creating value on a strategic level where it's actually, contributing towards revenue growth, operational efficiencies.
yeah.
Would you say that, through your work, you would agree with that in terms of the shift? Is it happening, or do you think it's already happened?
With a little bit of caveat, I would say, I mean, in many cases, specifically the starting point is some sort of exercise, right? People don't see the real value, and there are, myriads of new things are coming up, right? The EU
Sure.
has, although many things are delayed, a ton of new regulations. There are new players out there. Also, what's interesting, many of the larger companies and enterprises go back more or less to their own assessment and own questions because everyone wants to have the data, right? Obviously, right? So it pretty starts with some compliance requests, right? But people see then the value by integrating that, which we call sustainability intelligence, right? Because like the
Sure.
carbon footprint, right, is needed for this sort of assessment, is needed for the CSRD report, is needed for the basis of your product carbon footprint, right? So it starts growing, and currently, also to be honest, right? I mean, the downside is more decisive, right? It's not so much okay. We are able to grow necessarily by 20%, right? If we do that as a company and fulfill those requirements, an example, it's more that if we don't do it, we will have problems, right? Because we won't be able to fulfill a tender. We won't be able to do business any longer, right? You will
Sure.
have huge implications and ramifications if you don't follow that. But then, of course, right, with all the instruments, specifically around CSRD, when we talk about the climate transition plan and all the things, right, finally, what is the great thing? It really needs to come together, right? So we have the old world, right, the quality people, energy people, environmental people, right, now are kind of, fusioning with the finance people, right? And of course, with all the scaling, with all the implementing, with all the reporting necessary, right? This is a very interesting place because now you really have to put together, finance, strategy, right, and have more or less to have, let's say, ESG as an additional thing in your toolbox, which is influencing, all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just on the side anymore. It's actually being integrated. Finance is a massive topic that we'll obviously get onto a little bit further on
Yeah.
down the line. But yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying there. I think it's interesting as well because when it comes to DFGE, I mean, you're obviously more of a consultancy-based company, right? It's kind of advisory plus data. Whereas, these kind of big names within the market, like, your SGSs, your Bureau Veritases and stuff like that, that's more kind of, I would say, downstream, so verification, certification of the data. Am I getting that right?
No, that's pretty accurate, right? I mean, we really wanna help companies and give guidance moving things forward, right? I mean, we're not just pure consultancy. I mean, for more than 26 years now, we also have really dedicated packages, right? So people know exactly what's going on, right? And because we do it, not 10 times, 100, but 1,000 times, right?
Sure.
Literally, right? We're able to really guide people through that. And we also to, let's say, apply different levels because we still have large companies and enterprises, and we serve, obviously predominantly the DACH market, right? German, Austria, and Switzerland, but also we know many global corporations, US, Asian corporations with that. So this is very important for us to really help them and move things forward. So yeah, it is the consulting piece, and we of course now it's an interesting twist also with CERTANIA, right? That we have direct access there to certifiers, right? And to have that really as a separate entity moving forward, right? In the, let's say, creation of certain things which require a certification or a check at the end.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think from my kind of work, having conversations with a few people over the past kind of 12 to 18 months, I think when it comes to asking the question of what do clients actually want within the space, the answer that I've certainly got is end-to-end solutions. They don't kind of want fragmented advisory and assurance mandate. It's kind of really wanting something that's streamlined, efficient, and obviously, I'm assuming that obviously when it comes to end-to-end solutions, that's certainly something that you guys do work on as well.
Definitely. We provide those end-to-end solutions, but we're pretty much able to adopt to the specific, let's say, maturity of the customer, right? We still have
Sure.
large corporations who have like no one really, being in charge, right? And have, people who really have the time to fulfill the things, which is, I guess, crucial, right? It's super crucial because there's so many things when you don't realize what's relevant for you, you could get in really big trouble, right? You really miss opportunities out there down to companies with hundreds and hundreds of people and also different systems, right? And it's still some sort of fragmentation in terms of, as I said earlier, right? There is the
Yeah.
reporting piece, there is the finance piece, which is very established models, very expensive models sometimes. You still have all the production data, for example, in ERP systems, right? And obviously people, tend to have those systems, and we're able whether to provide end-to-end systems or to implement on existing systems, whatever is in place, whatever fragmentation is still in place there.
For sure, yeah. It's interesting as well that you just mentioned kind of ERP systems because when it comes to the conversation of, even kind of competitors who's kind of battling it out in the space, as I mentioned, you've kind of got two sides of it, right? You've got the consultancy side and then you've got the TIC providers where you've got,
Yeah,
as I said, SGS, Bureau Veritas. A lot of these companies, in my opinion, when it comes to, I suppose, integration of certain systems and even pieces of software, it's funny that, they themselves sometimes have the service offering, but they don't actually have the processes themselves to actually integrate new pieces,
yeah,
which I suppose in some ways is quite ironic. I mean, I'm assuming that you yourself kind of have to speak to some of the big players about
yeah.
a lot of work in terms of integration processes, in terms of actually, giving them advisory work.
Exactly. But still, and we're not, let's say, the IT implementation, right? I mean, this
Sure.
is this is typically, at the customer, right? I mean, they have the people, they have, all the security things they have to put in, right? We are really the ones who make, sense out of the data and to really, prioritize things, specifically now with the AI coming up, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's myriad great things that I can do, right? But they still have specifically when we talk about a lot of data, right? You have to validate it, right? You still
Yeah.
have to have an edge on that, and we have with our top-down approach being able, even large companies, very complex products, scope 3 data of DAX companies to be able to really condense it down and really to be able to validate what's happening and to improve quality over time, of course.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Fantastic. Perfect. Yeah. I mean, I suppose kind of the way that I wanted to break down the rest of the conversation was kind of three pillars. I know I
Mhm.
mentioned this to you. I mean, the last time that we spoke, it was funny because we were kind of suppose the reason why we had the conversation in the first place was kind of
Mhm.
my post that I did on LinkedIn about
Yeah,
ESG being a major growth
right.
driver in TIC.
Yeah,
That's something that, I'd be happy to discuss again. I mean, I think it's a really funny one because I remember kind of mentioning to you that a lot of the people that I speak to, they always ask me the question, do you think that kind of ESG is becoming kind of a core part of TIC along, the likes of, food and oil and gas?
yeah,
I suppose there's an argument to say yes. The way that I personally view it is I feel like ESG is kind of this horizontal blanket or
yeah,
like umbrella that literally spans across every single industry. You mentioned at the start, right? When it comes to service offering on your part, you literally do any industry, right? If there's a
correct.
need, we've got the capabilities to do it. But it's funny because I think there's kind of two mindsets where is ESG kind of a standalone thing where when it comes to like this new value creation and risk
Mhm.
mitigation, we can go in there and we can kind of just focus on that, in itself, or would you agree that it's more of an umbrella
Yeah,
term where everything just falls, within that space?
definitely. It's definitely an additional layer, right? And also, again, a different maturity because, as I said, right, this was like, I'm old, I'm young, but I'm old enough, right, to look back and say, like 20 years ago, like there was this one person, doing some sustainability, whatever reporting, just, leave him alone or leave her alone, and everything will be fine. Who cares, right?
Yeah,
And now it's really with all the systems like EcoVadis and CDP and CSD, you need all of those people, right? You need first and foremost the data to understand what's happening, right? You need HR data, you need social data, you need risk data, right? You need to know the process because essentially it all goes down, right? In many cases to a classical management system, right? Plan, do, check, act, right? You need the involvement of the people. So it's definitely totally more because you need the let's say the ESG or CSR, however you want to coin it, right?
sure,
Depending how old you are, right? ESG coming more from the finance side, CSR coming more from, let's say, the old sustainability side, right? You need the know-how everywhere, right? And what we see specifically is that more and more in totally different, let's say, parts of companies, right? Sustainability people are showing up, right? For example, right, when we talk about, for example, reducing, decarbonization program, right, reducing scope 3.1, right, purchase goods and services. I mean, who is responsible? The purchase department, right? So
sure,
there are sustainability purchase officers in place, right, taking care about getting proper PCF data, taking care about decarbonization, and so on and so forth, right? So this will be, necessarily, let's say, a skill or a muscle you have to build out on many places, from supply chain to sales.
sure. And in terms of kind of, I suppose we've kind of already covered this slightly by saying it has become, more about value creation than
Yeah.
compliance. Having said that, it is certainly regulatory driven. Would you say that there are any really other important factors other than kind of, regulatory advancements over the years that are really driving ESG? Do you think it is more perhaps, focused on revenue bases or operational efficiencies? Because I think a lot of these companies, especially when it comes to big corps, probably look at that and say, oh, actually, there's a real kind of opportunity there to go and grow our margins by X amount.
Yeah.
Or do you think it's more, okay, actually, we're going to do this because we need to keep in line and actually, make sure that we're avoiding costs in regulatory penalties, for example,
Yeah.
which
Yeah. Yeah.
have definitely become harsher, right? So yeah, I mean, the question simplified is, do you think it is just kind of regulatory? Do you think it's an abundance of different factors?
It's always it's always right. It's complicated, right? But as I said, specifically when companies start fresh off, they typically have this one pain point they kind of throw all in and say, okay, do we really have to do this? And we wanna just make it happen and don't spend too many resources. But then suddenly, as I said, right, there is. I mean, why is the carbon footprint so important, right? And so en vogue, so to say, right? Because you have this direct correlation, right,
Sure.
between, let's say, energy, the kilowatt hour, between resources, right, between raw materials, right, equipment, right. So there is a direct correlation. And when you save CO2, in many cases, right, you save resources, right? Not in all cases, but there's a direct logical correlation. That's definitely a point that you really can look at the cost. You really can look at resilience currently, right? Would it more sense to get the energy right from somewhere else, to get away from oil and gas, right, to renewables, right? I mean, these are really old stories, right, and old narratives.
Sure.
but they obviously pop up again. And it's also interesting that as soon as things are there, right, specifically, sales or marketing are jumping. It's okay, that's great, right? I mean, we have this gold medal, we have this A score, we have this amazing things we can, talk about. We have all those stories with our customers and suppliers. We can tell it, right? So it's definitely not just regulatory. There are, let's say many benefits moving forward, and also to get obviously better access to customers and access to capital, right? Because it is in many cases, right? It's risk mitigation through the capital market to adopt those, let's say, ESG disclosure systems. Really, to really look deeper and to look just with this different glasses at the same company, right? To see the risks and to see all the things happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose as well, like there's plenty of benefits in different areas, right? Even if it comes to, um, kind of like you said, carbon accounting platforms, even supply chain traceability, digital product passports, which you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
One question that actually I think someone put in the comment section of one of my posts, it was a very, let me see if I can put it up. It was a very blunt question. And it was just basically, I think I actually copied it on the thing that I sent you. It was basically something along the lines of who owns the ESG data layer.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'd have to think about that one. Do you have any kind of like intuition on or input into how you would answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, two aspects. One, I mean, there is an internal ESG data set. Let's put it that way. There is not one layer. There is also no data lake, which some some people use because a lake is kind of useless. And there is the external visibility. As I said, right? For example, take a product carbon footprint. If I have very detailed product carbon footprint, I can tell you everything, right? How this was manufactured, the energy efficiency, the machinery, the logistics, everything, right? So I have, let's say, some native interest to provide a footprint to my customer in a certain way, right? According to certain quality. Internally, I will have more data, right? So this is one thing which is important to understand. The second one is, I said, like, you have all those different data sets.
Sure.
Well, of course, AI is like promising, right? Everything is there somewhere. We would just snatch it and grab it, right? But reality is it's not as simple, right? It's not as simple to get data even out of an ERP system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, right, is the right data, like as always, is this the right data we collect, right, in the
Yeah.
system? And sometimes you just don't have data, right? You just have, certain location which is just, operates in a certain time frame. There is no data. There's still people running around with Excel files. There are different systems. There are system migrations from A to B to C, right? I mean, the larger the company gets, the more interesting those things are, right? Because it's a living creature, right? You cannot just say, okay, our company has this one piece of software which controls everything, right? It's just not the case. It's
Yeah.
not reality. So it will always be some mixture. And what we specifically, deal with now for 26 years is that we have those data gaps, right? You have to make assumptions, right? You have to scale up things to still have a robust view in it, because the thing with ESG data is not, oh, cool, I'm able to, really accurately measure it. You have to able how to change it, right? Again, back to the
Sure.
PDCA cycle, right? That's the important thing, right? How to reduce the footprint. Not, oh, it's very accurate, but we have no clue how to change it, right? Either way.
Yeah, it's not just kind of observing the data, but it's actually kind of putting it into action, if you like, I
Correct.
suppose. Yeah, no, that's a really good answer. I definitely was kind of stumped by that one because I was just thinking, well, there's various different ways that I can answer it, but it's really good to get that insight. Okay, I mean, I've definitely got some questions then.
Sure.
I've obviously kind of noted them down here. I mean, it's orientated around different elements, right? So the first one was just about kind of market strategy, and I suppose this will help not only the viewers, but it'll help me massively as well. So the first one that I had for you was, where do you see the biggest commercial growth in ESG services over the next 3 to 5 years? 3 years being a sweet spot that a lot of people kind of ask me. I've got my own ideas, which I'm happy to share after, but where would you
Yeah,
say
cool.
first?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, right? I mean, it's still not, or it's still interesting, right? That we still lack, in many large corporations, not to even to talk about the smaller ones, so a certain maturity, right, with the basics, right? There's still, huge gaps in scope 3 emissions, right? To understand that, right? Which means there is a lot of things going supply chain involvement, huge opportunities there with the data management, the data gaps with software solutions, but also with, integrated reporting and things like that, because it's not we are far from harmonizing things, right? Everyone dreamed about it when we talked about CSRD. Oh, cool, we have this one system, right? It goes to totally different direction because everyone needs the data, and everything gets more specific, right? Take for example, a simple corporate carbon footprint, right? You have some base methodology, which is ISO or THG protocol or PAS in the UK or whatever. Then you have on top of that typically, some sort of industry recommendation, right? And then you have on top of that, from ISO or TT, and then you have on top of that from some, association, right, as the automotive piece or PCI or TFS in the chemical industry, recommendations, and then rule books, and last but not least from, your directly customer, another thing on top, right? So it gets just more complicated over time, and the things are changing so quickly. And what we currently also see is that all the within the methodology, and also what we had earlier with let's say the friction, let's call it that way, between the financial reporting, right, and the ESG reporting, right, it's harmonizing somehow, it's diverging in other places, right? So there is a lot of things moving on, and it's still, people need to have the capability. You still need people, right? You cannot just run an AI system to do everything. So I think there is in all of the places huge growth opportunities to really streamline things and to scale things, and specifically to help people then really organize and orchestrate things internally with process, with support, with consulting, with software.
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of the assurance and verification piece as well is going to be huge. But yeah, it's a key question that a lot of people ask me. Where do you see it? Which kind of key pieces of growth do you see happening in the next 3 years? It's just a sweet spot that everyone likes to ask me. So that's really good to get some insight on that. Would you say that in terms of kind of maybe looking at your certain cases over the past couple of years even, would you say that kind of clients are still buying ESG for compliance, or would you say, I know we've already kind of answered this in terms of a general scope, but from your personal perspective, would you say it is shifting towards more kind of operational efficiencies?
It's definitely shifting, right? Because also, let's say, what I mean, it's first of all, it's a natural thing, right? Specifically, okay, we've never done a carbon footprint. Suddenly you do it. Suddenly, people, in charge of energy, right, or in charge of equipment, or in charge of whatever, they will ask like, how do you come to this number? How do you calculate? And then, okay, this is how like they feel responsible, and suddenly things are happening, right? Because everyone has the urge to reduce the number, right? So that's a native thing. If you have more data, automatically things will happen, right? So there's a lot more than just the compliance piece, and it will automatically happen because you can base your decisions and the judgment on data, which is a total game changer, right?
Sure.
I mean that's definitely a driver, far beyond the pure compliance thing, and also some of the, let's say, elements within, for example, CSRD, right? Or take a science-based target as an example, right? Suddenly you have this target, and suddenly you have to, okay, oh, how do we get there, right? How do we measure progress, and what are we doing? And or a climate transition plan within CSRD. Oh my God, now we have to put this together, and now we have to make some internal cost abatement curves about what to do, and really make decision, and really again use it as an additional tool internally also to move things forward, right?
Sure.
Technically a lot of things can be done, right? But is it feasible from a business point of view or not, right? What are the decisions to make, right? And like no company is standing still, right? It's always change, and this is really, really, I mean, still totally interesting and totally
Sure.
dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to kind of a lot of the companies asking these sorts of questions, and I suppose looking at things and saying, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we be more efficient? Where would you say, I mean, in terms of maybe inbound or even the outbound stuff that you do when it comes to
Mhm.
working with companies, would you say that it is more, for example, chief operating officers that are usually interested in this kind of topic, or would you say it's more executive officer level? I mean, I'm assuming it is probably more lent towards operations.
It's interesting because, like, historically it was all over the place. Kind of
Really?
depending, like, who had the, let's say, who had the initial request or idea and or the willingness to do something. So, like, 15 years ago, it was all, it could be in sales and marketing, right? It could
Wow.
be in energy, it could be in quality, it could be on the CEO side directly, it could be in supply chain, everywhere, all over the place, right? This was really
Sure.
interesting because you couldn't really predict that, right? Where things are coming. What we currently see is more that, although you might not have necessarily yet a central element, right, orchestrating all of that, right? there are still things happening, right? The logistics guys crunching the numbers and providing stuff, right? There is the product guys who providing product carbon footprint, the sales guys even providing product carbon footprints, right, on the quotes, right? There are a lot of things happening. Now, I guess the challenge is more to really in a positive and proper way, right, to analyze what's cooking, right, what's happening, how can we scale those things, how can we make people even better, but how can we kind of orchestrate that and give them some sort of help versus everyone is doing his own stuff and every location has their own, people doing whatever, providing ridiculous sometimes or misleading information to customers, because depending on where you ask in a company, you will get a totally different answer. Which is, of course, so I think more the orchestrating piece, right, is currently the interesting sweet spot to look at, right, to make sure you develop it, right, and you understand, and you have, as always, right, it's always the best if you have, whoever is the person in charge of DG, if this is like, smart, nice person who can get along with a lot of people, because you don't have those formalized processes necessarily, which you have in finance.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably even more, to simplify it, kind of even about a lot of these companies, like you said, maybe in the past it's been a little bit all over the place. When it comes to kind of data sharing, becoming more synergized, it's becoming a lot more uniformed in a sense where, there can be maybe not one point of call, but, a couple as opposed to loads within one business. But yeah, no, that's really, really interesting for me to know, especially when it comes to kind of my work and kind of approaching certain people and asking them to have these sorts of conversations. The other question that I had actually, which I'm really, really eager to get a response on, is in terms of industries, you do everything, right?
Yes.
That's why I'm a massive fan of what you do. When it comes to, I suppose, looking at maturity and which industries are more mature when it comes to ESG, and more specifically its adoption, which ones would you say are like at the top end? Yeah, they've really adopted it well, very mature. And then which ones would you say are perhaps lagging behind, need a little bit of a boost? I think my genuine opinion is, like, we've already spoken about it, but like financial services, for example, like hugely mature, I would say. Other things like construction, I would say,
But
is
they have a
probably a
huge
little bit
problem.
lagging.
We can get into the financial business. I mean, they have one problem, right? I mean, they are mature in terms of they know how to, let's say, streamline those processes, right? But if you think about that, right? I mean, in many cases, you don't have direct access to the data, right? You just know, okay, I financed someone who financed a manufacturing company, right? But what's really happening is really hard, right? And there are also specific, let's say, methodologies out there for calculating emissions, right? Within financed emissions, right? PCAF and others out there. I mean, you always have some sort of, let's say, bandwidth or uncertainty in those calculations. And there, of course, it's even larger because you cannot pinpoint it down, right? And you also, like, at which point do we have invested and how do we, depreciate things and like that. So that's hard for them. I mean, they are definitely on the forefront, specifically in risk, I would say 100%, right? If you talk specifically about physical risk models, right? From Climata, from Munich Re, right? From Zurich Reinsurance, right? I mean, those are the native ones. That's definitely the other interesting part. I would say historically, right? Because this is also where we came from, like 26 years ago, is a little automotive, right? The analytics specifically about, let's say, fuel consumption or energy consumption, because, like, also, let's say, the set of possible vehicles, right? From hydrogen to electrical cars to whatnot, right? I mean, it's all there, right? There is literally nothing new in terms of the overall, let's say, thought about it. Of course, the technology, the individual pieces, battery techniques. I mean, this is far better, right, and far advanced. But from the general models or ideas, that's pretty old. So I would say those, or even the energy industry, right? Manufacturing then would be next, right? Who just have this user, let's say, urge or the current need. And then what happened afterwards was more than logistics is always a part, right? It's always interesting. There are also even certain laws in place, like in France or other, where you have to, provide CO2 data, for example, which is also cost factor. It directly correlates. Packaging is a big one because it's kind of involved everywhere, right? It's very haptic, right? So I think, right, those would be the more mature ones. They still have the problems and still struggle. And I think there are, many ones like pharma, chemical industry who also, did very great things in the past. I mean, as I said earlier in this example, they get more specific, right? They put in their own methodologies and their own layers and their own rule books and emission factors and whatnot in place.
Sure. Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. I mean, even kind of looking at, I suppose, industries as a whole, it's interesting because you can either do that or you can go a little bit more niche in the viewpoint and maybe even look at kind of the different firms.
Mhm,
Someone asked me the other day, and I know that I touched on it earlier, but a lot of TIC firms at the end of the day, they do lack capabilities in ESG.
mhm,
I was even having a conversation with a company where they were looking to create an ERP system where they kind of targeting enterprise, and they asked me, they were like, where do you think we should go with this, because we're looking at kind of remodeling the product or the service,
mhm.
and what do you feel like the kind of key pain points are in the space. My biggest thing was like reluctance to change on like an individual human level.
That's
Someone was
always
kind of
good
saying
or bad.
it is, and like I was kind of saying, they were like, okay, can you expand on that? And I was like, well, look, when it comes to kind of integrations, digitalization, when it comes to really kind of changing the trend and
Yeah,
adapting these new capabilities, you have to have people that are open-minded. You have to have people that are willing to do it and see the value in it. And I'll be totally honest with you, like even working with people myself, there's a lot of people that I speak to that just like, nah, we can't be, we can't be bothered with that rubbish because
yeah.
it works fine the way that it does. Our kind of budgets, our responsibilities, they look fine. Would you say that kind of change or reluctance to change is like a massive part in terms of perhaps why a lot of tech firms or maybe even industries, however you want to kind of
Yeah.
look at it, do you think that's a massive reason as to why there is kind of a lag of people adopting these sort of stuff?
That's a really interesting point, right? And it's what I said earlier. Even in the project, in the real world, right? I mean, it's when you bring in, let's say, new things, right? You
Mm,
really have to be careful, right, to see, what already happened there, right? And really, kind of appreciate it and move things forward versus saying, okay, that's kind of the new thing. Whatever you did in the past, is total rubbish, right? It's all wrong, right? What you did for 20 years. And of course, this on a personal level, which is very important, right? It will be hard, right? You need, as always, with any project, you need the management buy-in, right? If the people on the top don't understand what's going on, don't see the value, and don't, let's say, allocate resources to move forward, it will be hard. There will be people who were doing things right in a certain way, right? At least you can grab the data and then in a very gentle way try to adopt to the new world. And you really have also to be resilient internally because the changes are so fast, right? I mean, there
mm,
was a kind of this one delay, let's say with CSRD, but all the other changes are happening so fast, right? Even this greenhouse gas protocol is changing again,
mm,
right? Which is the basics for many things. And overall, let's say, but I'm not pretty sure in other industries it's the same, right? Every 3 to 5 years, right? Let's say the major player, the major methodologies are just, getting an update, right? Because there are
sure.
people behind it also individuals say like, hey, we have to do something new, right? We have to do, otherwise it gets boring, right? To always get an A rating or a platinum rating, right? We have to do
Sure.
something about it. So you really have to understand, what's cooking, and you really have to internally, which is, of course, a problem in, let's say, when the economy is not there where it should be, right? People have, a lot of other things to do, right?
Sure.
There were definitely also a bunch of layoffs in different industries, right? You just don't have the capacity and say, okay, oh my God, now I have to do this on top, right? I mean, what are we talking? That's why you have to have a good strategy, not asking the same person like every 3 months exactly the same data, as an example,
Sure.
right? Which is, of course, hugely annoying and not really productive.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting that you mentioned there in terms of like the economy and people not wanting to have to kind of, I suppose, on board more tasks. Because when I was speaking with this company, they were kind of saying to me, well, from a hierarchical point of view in a company, you've obviously got, people that are slightly lower in seniority. So, let's just take a, I don't know, an inspection or a compliance company,
Yeah.
as an example, where you've got people that are kind of like field service engineers, right? So they go
Yeah.
out, they'll do the inspections, they'll do, compliance audits or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then you've got kind of senior management where it comes to operations, looking at, KPIs, overlooking operations. I would suppose probably more data driven.
Mhm.
Would you say that like bottom level of an organization or kind of senior levels is where kind of that reluctance to change comes from? Because that I thought was a really interesting question, because one kind of side of things, you've got the kind of low level seniority people that are kind of like, look, I just want to do my job. I just want to crack on. I don't want this new adoption of having to do
Yeah.
all these new things to kind of, be compliant and actually, be sharing data that is fundamentally needed. But then at the same time, you've probably got more of a push from a senior level where they're saying, well, we actually need this data in order not only to be compliant, but to become more efficient and therefore
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
more profitable.
Yeah. It's definitely both, right? We see both cases. We see, where let's say the owner of the company, right, the C level is just not seeing the point. The whole team, like the own ESG team saying we need to do this, the sales team saying we need to do this, right? Whatever supply chain, we need to do this. And no, we don't need to do this. And then shit hits the fan, right? And so we told you. And it literally, right, in the people were leaving then the company, right? So we have those cases, and we have the other cases where let's say the top level saying that's very important for us, right? We need this to get access to capital, we need this to be compliant, right? And so on and so far, where you have, let's say, the mid-level, or at least, again, individuals is just saying, no, it's total bonkers, it's total bullshit, right? It's not how we
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it, right? I don't want that, and I have kind of the power to kind of play with it. So I guess it's also the same in any industry and any topic, right? 70 to 80% is politics, right? How
yeah,
to play
literally.
something, who to involve in something, how to do this change management, and how to specifically explaining things, right? This is also what's very important for us, right? You cannot just go in and say, okay, now this is now welcome to this workshop about whatever, a carbon footprint or a double materiality analysis or whatnot. I'm just like, what are we talking? Like, why do we need to do this? Right? What's
Yeah.
behind? So we're always very keen. Okay, like this is behind. This is why we do it. This is exactly what we need from you, right? And this is let's say the why. And this is the behind the scenes, right? This will happen with the data. It's so important. Otherwise, you say like, okay, that's not in my contract. I don't do this. I don't give you any data, and then the project is doomed to fail from the
Literally.
start.
Literally, it's interesting actually, because I think I also kind of said that it's probably from all levels, but it'd just be interesting to maybe get some insight into whether it is more, from a senior perspective. But I think you're absolutely spot on. It just depends, right?
Yeah.
Case by case basis. You might have some companies that the executive levels are saying we don't need that. At the same time, when it comes to kind of maybe less senior staff at other companies, oh, we don't want to adopt this new, bullshit that we we need, like you
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Literally.
But yeah, no. I mean, look, do you want to kind of add anything or anything that you feel like we've not covered? I feel like we've done a pretty good job, in terms of kind of the general discussion.
No, absolutely. I mean, thanks for having me, and thanks for asking those great questions, right? And I think specifically, right, as part of our CERTANIA group, right, it's a very interesting field for us, right? Because now again, we have specifically, the certification inspection capabilities, right, within different entities. We have this European reach, more or less, right? Because it's always kind of more or less a global problem. And we should not forget, right? I mean, we always kind of focused on a European level of
Mm,
doing things with CCD and other things, but there is, requirements in the US still
yeah,
to provide, climate risk analysis. There is a massive shift happening in China, right? We have all
absolutely.
those, let's say, local regulations on top, right? In the Netherlands, in the UK specifically, which is always on the forefront with all the PAS regulations, for example, right? And also,
Sure.
you know, which is also interesting. Always when I'm in London in looking for books, right, in bookstores, right? There's always you guys in the UK are always, let's say, 1 or 2 years ahead in terms of what is discussed, what people read, right,
Sure.
about the topics, right? I mean, biodiversity. And all those things were already there 3, 4, 5 years ago, right? This is just happening in, let's say, German bookstores, right, for 12 months or so, which is
Really?
always interesting to see. Yeah, definitely. It's always kind
Wow.
of, the thing. So, always look at the specifically in ESG, Also the regulations, right? When they first came up, the first schemes in the UK about that listed companies had to report their emissions and so on and so far. Like, you guys were always on top of things, or the great data, the Excel files, the emission factors provided for free and stuff. It's very interesting, right? To see that. Highly
Wow.
appreciate it.
Wow. No, not a problem. No, if you're ever over here, we should definitely grab a coffee or something and meet up. But
Definitely.
honestly, I can't thank you enough for your time. It's been a pleasure.